Hi and welcome to Painting with Yuk-Sem. Today we'll be painting a Misty Morning, so let's get to it. So I'm using acrylic paints and I'm going to go right in and get some water on my brush and start with the titanium white and going in with a bit of neutral gray just to get that basic color onto the canvas. So with the acrylics, adding a bit of water really helps you to be able to spread that paint out and get the coverage. You can also use a medium that will extend the drying time, and some of it will thicken it, or like a gel medium, or there's other ones that will make it a bit more runny, or some extenders. Some will make it more glossy, some will make it a little bit more matte, so you can play around with that depending on what kind of additives you want to add to your acrylic. So I'm just getting some coverage, and I'm not really worried about the brush strokes just yet because I just want the canvas to have that wet paint on it. So again, just a bit of the gray and the white this time, and on this side just a bit darker, so that the sun is going to be on this side of the painting. So now I'm going to start blending it to get rid of that line from the lighter to the darker. And now I'm going to make sure that I have that horizontal brush stroke to be able to really avoid having the vertical lines for any of that background, so that we get that longer view on there. So now that the background is pretty much one color and it's got, that paint's going to be wet enough for me to be able to come in and add some layers to it. So it's a really light gray. So now I'm going to start by going in with my brush with a bit of a darker gray. So it's a neutral gray. I haven't washed my brush, but I also haven't added any white to it. So over here, I'm going to decide about where the horizon line is, which is where the land meets the air. And then from the corner here, I'm going to turn my brush vertically, and that's going to allow me to come in. And by just using the bottom corner and slowly working my way up to the whole brush, is that I can get that tree line in the back. And by dabbing back and forth on it, I start adding a really light tree line in the back. So that's going to be my first layer. The way to do the mist in the morning is to really build on those layers. So I know that I want these ones to be fairly far in the distance, so I'm using almost the same color. As we get closer, you're going to see more and more of that color coming through. So now that I have the basic tree line, I'm going to wash off a bit of that white off of my brush. I'm going to come in with a bit more of that gray, and then I'm going to add now some of those trees, again a vertical brush, a bit of that neutral gray, and I'm going to come in and add some of them. Now they're getting bigger, so with perspective, the further ones are going to be smaller, the closer ones are a bit taller and a bit wider as you get closer to you. So I'm going to have this in a bay of a lake. So I'm going to work it so that it looks like the trees are coming around this bay here. So the way I do that is to try and get that C shape right here. So I'm going to bring some of those trees around into that shape here. So you're getting that curve that comes along the shoreline, and then we're going to have those rocks down here. Now that I have the basic shape, I'm going to get some darker gray again for the trees that are even closer here. Now that I know where the tree line is, I'm going to wash my brush, and the background should be pretty dry. So I should be able to come in now with a bit of the white and be able to just do some X's in the background to give some impression of clouds. So I'm going in with the white on top of the back to bring in some of those clouds and that mist above the tree line. So the horizontal paint strokes from before will give that length to that sky, and now this is just going to add some bit of texture to it. And what I'm doing is doing that X over it in order to blend those brush strokes. So in the beginning, it'll be a little bit harder to see because now I'm using all the same of those colors. But one way that I'll help you to see a little bit more is with just a bit of that gray. I'm going to come in and redo right at the bottom of those trees some of the horizontal water lines. Just on top, I've used the same, I kept this color here the same as the sky because we want the sky to always be reflected in our water. So if it's a misty sky, you're going to get that same gray on the water. And now I'm just adding a little bit of darker gray in the water here, just so you'll be able to see where it is. The key with the water is to always have it be very level and horizontal. If you end up tipping it or making too many waves, it's going to look either like there's like an ocean has a lot of waves, but especially a calm morning with the mist generally is pretty flat. So as I move on in the layers of the painting, now I'm going into more of the gray. It's going to pick up a little bit of that white, but again, it's about building those layers and making sure that you're just doing those subtle changes in the color. I'm going to add one last layer of just the gray into these trees. And now we're going to start adding a bit of color. So I'm going to grab the little bit of the blue and add it to the gray, just the tiniest amount. And that will create just a little bit, the first hints of color in our background. And then I come in, I haven't washed my brush, I add a little bit more blue. And I'm going to add just a few more trees. And I'm always going over the same spots. If I miss some, if there's some gaps, what's the nice thing is that there's always going to be all those different colors behind it that will come in and fill in those gaps. So now I have a brighter blue, and when I want to do a bit more of a tree that's defined, I'm turning my brush, coming in, starting with the corner, and then dabbing from side to side, and then I'm turning my brush so that it's now horizontal in order to get that pine tree look. So again, you see the gray trees in the back, the ones that are closer are actually going to have a bit more color and be more defined. So it's a way that you can play with that depth, is to have some of that color be there. So I'm just going to add a few more trees that are close to the shore here. And I'm playing with the angle of my brush, going in with the corner to get a little bit of that triangle. making sure that every once in a while I have that nice blue that's coming out, and it's going to still be fading out into the distance there. All right. Because there was still a lot of gray in it, I'm going to wash it off and go and get now more of that blue in order to, in front here, start with the corner of my brush and build a bit of that bigger tree that's coming in front here. And if you want, you can give yourself a guideline with the trunk. All right, so I'm just going to come in on this side of the tree, add a few of those branches in that dark blue in order to get some texture there. Every once in a while I'll come back in with a vertical line just to give the impression of that trunk, but it doesn't have to be seen the whole way. So one of the things when you're painting is that it's always fun to let it kind of take on a life of its own and see what that paint's going to do today, because I can do the same painting over and over and over, and every time that I do it, it'll be just a little bit different depending on how I pick it up, how I bring the brush onto my canvas. So once again, it's nice to just let it create itself to a certain extent and not be too worried about, you know, whether or not it's coming out perfectly as I wanted. So now we have the light mist in the background with the sky. We went into the lighter colors, getting darker into the gray, the lighter blue getting into the darker ones now. And the last little piece that I want to do is add just a touch of green into that gray for some of this lake here. And I'm picking up, so I'm doing the lake, so then again my brush is turned horizontally and I'm doing those horizontal lines that are very level. I'm picking up a little bit of that blue from the trees, but I'm also dragging some of that green to give it a bit of a different color on that lake. Now that I have some color, I can wash off my brush, make sure that I don't have too much of that blue left on there, pick up some gray and come in on this side, because here I picked up the blue that I wanted it from the reflections onto the lake. Here I just want to pick up some of that green and blend it into the gray of the lake. So I'm not coming in and touching that blue over there. I'm just making sure that I get that gray and getting that really nice level coverage on the lake. So once again, you'll see if you did a dip in your paint and your brush stroke on the lake, it'll show immediately. So you have to really make sure that you're coming in and getting that nice level horizontal line in order to get that lake to really show up and be looking like that water. So now I'm going in with a bit of the green and the blue, and I'm just going to stipple on. So by stippling it and dabbing it on here, I can get a little bit of that reflection, but because there's that mist, I don't want too much, but there's going to be a little bit here of those trees that are reflected in the lake, especially because there's so much more color. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting some of that color on this side of the lake before I put in those big trees that I want to make sure are on over here. All right, so now the background's pretty much done. What I'm going to do is make sure that brush is washed off, and come in and be able to, I'm using the fan brush. So the fan brush is a flattened brush that's spread out. It's very useful for doing the trees. In one of the other episodes, I went into it a little bit more in detail with on one of the trees. So what I did is really go in and get some paint on the edges, be able to use your brush first to get that trunk, turn it, use the corners, make sure you have nice paint on there, turn it to use the corner, and then come in. And the fan brush is really nice because it gives you that detail without too much effort for that nice fanning of the branches. And I'm going to do one now with a little bit of that green mixed in with the blue back here. And I'm going to come in, and once again, I'm just dabbing and fanning it out. So I'm getting that coverage. Come in, grab some to make those shadows in there. All right. At the bottom here, we're going to be having some rocks. So I'm just going to finish off the lake and bring it here so that we can do the rocks in front. So once again, it's a bit of that white and the gray. And the closer it is, now there's going to be a little bit more of that mist, so it'll be a little bit whiter in that horizontal water line. And get that like that. And then I'm going to pick up just a touch of that green, bring that in. As it comes closer here, and then I'll pick up a bit of the blue, make sure that that's carried over. And the nice thing is that wherever I decide that lake's gonna come in, doesn't matter if there's already a tree there, we're gonna paint right over it and bring the edge of that lake right to there. One of the things is that as you're getting really close to the edge of the lake, that's when you can start adding the darker colors, and with shorter strokes start to add in just a few of those waves that are lapping onto the shore. And by going back and forth and having the shorter strokes, that will give you that impression there. All right. And if you don't like what your waves are doing, don't forget, all you have to do is come back in and paint over it. Acrylics is, the great part is that nobody knows whether or not there was supposed to be a tree there or rock, or how far that water was actually supposed to go. So now that we have our water built in, I'm going to wash this off and get to the rocks. So for the rocks, I'm going to do a background, and the background's going to have is going to be a little bit lighter because it's in the morning and there's going to be some water on the shore, which is reflecting the sky again. So the background that I'm going to do is just a bit of a darker version of the sky, especially down here in the corner. And then as I get closer to the shore, I'm going to darken it up a little bit and add just a bit of black to that gray. So this shoreline, I'm going to add a bit of water to that so that the shoreline, if you see that right where the water is meeting the land, if you bring your brush and just lift it towards where the water is going, that'll give you that shoreline, and that where the sand is meeting, or the rocks, or the land is meeting the water. And you can drag it right into the water a little bit to get that line. And if you notice, these are fairly level again, so that you're getting that nice perspective for your land. Now that I have the base layer, now we get to start to have fun with some rocks. So the rocks here, I'm using some black with a little bit of the gray, and with a rounded brush, I'm going to use that to my advantage and just come in and start tapping in without over blending the paint on the palette. By leaving some of that paint on my brush, it'll actually come and add some different colors to those rocks. So I'm just not retouching and retouching all of those rocks. I'm just adding some small touches of horizontal lines. Sometimes I'll press a little bit more and that'll give me a bit of a bigger one. And come in, leave some spaces so that you can see some of that background. Come in, I'll grab a bit more of the black for closer to the shore. Those will be smaller ones. The bigger ones have been put in the back here, so make sure I got some of those. Every once in a while, I like to go and grab some of that white and make sure that there's a couple of the rocks that have some highlights on them, a bit of a different color. If you want, you can come in and add some of the blue just to give it a little bit of color and blend it so you have a bit more of harmony. You can leave some of that gray area where it's just sand. Bring in a big rock right about there. One way you can do is bring the rock on one side and then bring your brush on the other, and that'll give you the impression of having a rock with a bit of an edge. And the other way, let's say over here we have one of those big square rocks. So it's got a little bit more of a jagged edge here. And see, as though the light's coming from that end. This one's going to be in the shadow. So I'm just going to drag that paint down and then drag it over in a bit of a wiggle. And then make another big old rock ledge there. Add a bit of white so that we can get some definition on it. On there. Bit of a rock in front. The ones that are in shadow. And really, when you're painting rocks, the nice thing is that nobody, once again, nobody knows what's really supposed to be there or not. So you can play around with the size and the shape. This one, all the rocks are pretty much going the same way, and in formations that you would find kind of on Lake Superior, is that lake has come and washed them and given you some really nice rounded rocks without having big boulders, but at the same time having a lot of texture on the shore. So I'm going to come in, add just a few more rocks around there. And if you want, like I said, you can come in, make sure that there's some white every once in a while for those highlights of where those rocks are. And I'm going to grab the last little piece here on the top of that rock. Add that highlight, this one here, because I want it to be maybe a little bit clearer. So the last little piece that I'm going to do is on the edge of the water here to show that maybe there's just a little bit of movement. So I'm going to come in with my little detail brush. I'm going to go get some of that white, and I'm going to just start adding in just a few little lines of where that water is coming and lapping it up. from the waves. One of the things that when you're making waves, you always want it, one, to stay pretty much level, or in that, right here we have that base, so to have those lines that if this wave is coming in, it's going to be coming in all at the same time, so that wave should continue all the way across. If you're going to add another wave, just don't add it wherever. Pick a spot behind that wave, come in and make sure that you're running that wave all the way along so that you have that continuance and that rhythm of those waves that are coming up on your shore. So all I'm doing to add those, the tops of the waves are some little dabs of white, and I'm running it back into the wave a little bit, very lightly, so that it's just dragging a little bit of that paint with it. Right, like that. And as you go, you can add a little bit more, play with the waves, play with the shapes, how many you want, right underneath. A lot of times, right under where that wave is, you can add just a bit of darkness, because that's where you get the tiniest bit of shadow as that wave is coming over. So in where there's a couple of those bumps, we can add some shadow. And just like that, we have that misty morning and the lake shore. And you should be able to keep on adding little pieces and make it your own as we go. Oh, I'm just gonna make that into a bit more of a rock right there. There we go. So I hope you have fun with that and that you're able to now go and give it a try. And I'll see you next time on Painting with Yuk-Sem.